Well, hey everybody, I'm Harry, and this is Creative Goo. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Hopefully the echo is gone. I'll keep monitoring chat. I always monitor chat. I love the interaction, ask questions, do all that kind of stuff. But as I was mentioning, my screen is a little bit higher because I've actually elevated my desk so I can actually sculpt actively, because we're going to talk about sculpting in a little bit more detail today. So hopefully that's exciting for you. And a reminder that Gooey Cube, again, sponsors this show. You can go to gooeycube.com. You can check us out on Facebook at the Gooey Cube's Game Master Den of Enlightenment on Facebook. But you can find us just by looking for Gooey Cube. I sell my miniatures on my mini factory, and that's enough advertising for today. All right, so we're going to be talking about, let's see if I can get this working. We're going to be talking about sculpting the face today. I'm going to be working in ZBrush, my favorite tool for sculpting. And can we get an endorsement from Goo to ask Dr. Ransom Keys? So let me go back to my video here, and I'm going to show you something. So we've now got an official document that explains how you can play a 5e game with a mollusk creature like escargot. So it's the rules haven't been tested or anything, but I'm super excited about it. And then this is the same picture, so I printed it out. So this is escargot. I've created the miniature of this guy too. And I showed some pictures, photos of the miniature, showed it on camera. It painted up really, really nice. So it's basically, and I told the story last week too. So if you want to catch that video, escargot is a snail-like creature that's intelligent and can cast spells and everything, and you can decide how you might use it in your game. So I had so much fun with it, I made sure and sculpted it. So that was a lot of fun. So thanks, Dr. Ransom Keys, for that. Okay, so real quick, again, I wanted to talk about sculpting faces, and I'm going to show a little bit about my process if I'm building something from scratch, which you can do as an artist. You can start just with this ball of clay. So we always, when we talk about training in sculpting in the digital environment, you want to get as close to sculpting in clay as you can, or sculpting in a physical medium as you can, because it's a three-dimensional object. You're not drawing, you're moving clay. You're adjusting the clay. And the closer the software gets you to that actual sculpting, the more natural it'll feel. There's other features and there's other software packages where you can model, and mostly you're moving shapes around. So you might be extruding squares or cubes or even spheres, but that's the method for creation. And that's more math for me and more architecture and design. I like the physical sculpting concept, and because I love the organic forms more than the mechanical ones. So that's what I'm going to be showing today. I'm actually going to drop my face on and off so you can see the whole screen here. And a couple of things I've done is, as an artist, you want to use references. So when I block out this sphere, I'm going to be looking at this skull illustration that I have. I mean, I could look at physical skulls and all that stuff, which would be really great if I had a skull in my office, and do rotating views and things like that. I'm a what you would call a stylized artist. So while my stuff is realistic, I'm not looking for photorealism or exact specifications. In fact, I mess with proportions so that it prints and it reads well on the table as an inch tall miniature. So I have to keep those things in mind when I'm sculpting. And so the head is actually larger on a body than it would be in a human. The hands are bigger. I have to make those kinds of decisions when I'm sculpting. And so reference, I have the skull. Some other references I have too is this tool I've mentioned before called PureRef. Oops. There we go. And so you can see it here on the screen. And basically it's software where I can just drag pictures in. So I drag those same pictures, the two skulls, and I can zoom in, get really close. I can zoom out and see other things. And once I have the basic shape, I might look at some of these other things and decide, what else I want to do. So I have this woman's face from the side. Let me see if I can get. The only thing about PureRef is where it zooms is based on where your mouse is. So since I'm also working on the screen, it's going to impact where I zoom in. So I have the woman's face, so you can see it from the side and from the front. Great reference. I actually have quite a few references I paid for so that I can sculpt. And then the rest of these references are illustrations, 3 of which are from Gooey Cube. As you can see, the Gooey Cube license and logo for this female halfling character that I'm thinking about sculpting. And then there's this Godfrey, another character from Gooey Cube that I pulled out of an adventure. And then this is Titus Sid, another character. So illustrations are wonderful for ideas, but you only get that one angle. And so you have to make some artistic decisions. And then this character here in the middle, if I zoom in, this guy, I apologize that I don't know the name of the artist, but this is an illustration of me as a character in a live stream that we did. I was a guest on one of the episodes, and I'll have to mention it next week or something because my mind is just so focused on sculpting right now. I'm not remembering where I got some of these. So you can use these. I have multiple monitors, so I could have this PureRef on a different monitor that I'd sculpt from. Obviously, I'm showing you guys on the same plane so you can see. The thing I can do in ZBrush, I was able to bring those references into the UI so they're right there. There's other features you can do for pulling references in, but I like just having it on the side away from where I'm sculpting. And then the other thing you can do if you don't have PureRef or don't want to use it, I just have those images, right? So this is just a JPEG or PNG, and I can zoom in and use that as a reference when I'm sculpting. So I don't want people to think that I do sculpt from my imagination quite a bit, don't get me wrong, but I do also use references, especially if I'm tying it to something like the world of Zyathé from Gooey Cube. So that, this is really cool. He's got this symbol carved in his skull and this wild hairdo. And then, of course, the other character that I'm thinking about is this Hodfrey or Godfrey or something. And he's very stylized. I mean, this would be a lot of fun because the shapes of his face are so different from the human norm. And so you can have some fun with that. So those are just things that I have just blowing around in my head as I think about what I'm going to do. And I'm going to show you guys some stuff that I've done. But first we're going to start with this sphere. And again, I'm going to be looking down at the screen, so just bear with me. So I have this reference here, and one of the first things I do when I'm sculpting is try and get a little closer with the sphere to the shape I'm looking for, maybe a little flatter. And the other thing you can do with software like this is what's called symmetry. So it automatically tracks both sides. And so I can and when I'm making the basic shapes, that's what you want to do. The other things you want to do when you're doing sculpting like this is keep the resolution of the clay low because you want to focus on forms, not on the details. I shouldn't be worrying about the shape of the nose right now. I don't even have the shape of a head yet, right? So this doesn't look like anything. And so I use what's a move brush where I'm just moving the clay. I'm going to make it really big so I can move the back of this up because, as you know, people have a jaw and a neck. So it's just simple strategy here to get some of those basic shapes because we're not working with the sphere anymore. And that's already helping the silhouette. And we want to just do that. And the other thing that I'll do often, I'm going to do it real quick just to show you, is I'll just put a cylinder in for the neck so I can keep it as a reference. So let me do that. And so where's this neck going to go? And it doesn't have to be perfect because it's just a reference point for as you're working. So that's probably tilted too far. Necks don't really bend like that. All right, and so the back of his skull is looking a little bit he looks more alien than human, so we want to get that pulled in. You can also do a smoothing action, and why is that not working? have to go back to my keyboard. Having problems. That is not good. Smooth. Something's wrong with my UI. I'm going to restart ZBrush and try again. It happens. Let me save as so I can bring this project right back where it was. See? Software doesn't always work the way it's supposed to. And I'm going to close these for now because I have pure rough. And let's see if I come back into ZBrush if I get my UI back. And remember, if you have any questions, yeah, let me answer that question in just a second. Let me find my project here. Where is it? There it is. Aha. It didn't like what was happening. So the tool got corrupted, and I don't know why. So I'll start again. And let me go find those images. Oh well, I'll just use pure ref. So you guys saw that I had those skulls. I'm just going to move them on my screen so I can see them. Boom, boom, boom. Not inside. I'm having a lot of technical difficulties today for some reason, and I don't know why. Now it looks really weird. Oh well. I can see the skulls. So I'm going to have to start over and make this skull. I'm going to go a bit faster. Yeah, that looks nicer. I wonder what happened. And turn on my move brush, make it really big. Let's make this smaller. It's probably too narrow. There we go, I like that better. And then go back to what I was doing, which is moving this, creating the draft to the face, moving this back so it looks more realistic. Okay, that's already looking better. All right, so you can see really quickly just by moving the clay around, I can get close to what I'm looking for. Let me make the brush a little bit smaller. And I'm sorry I lost the skulls, but I think you guys can see that we're getting somewhere. And then you had a question about do you need to worry about support materials? So this is just digital sculpting, so I don't have to write anything except the sculpture. And that's how I operate, right? So while there's things that I do because I know what I need to accomplish to make it printable, so I am careful about having holes in the sculpt or maybe the arm is really thin and I have to think about whether that's going to be too fragile. But for the most part, you can just sculpt. Then the process is, after I sculpt something, then I kind of do some engineering where I merge objects together. I remove any holes. I look for things that'll be a problem when you print, and that just comes with practice. And then, yes, you're going to have to support it. These are miniatures. You can sculpt miniatures in such a way that they can print without supports. I like my miniatures a lot more dynamic, and so I don't worry about that. But you actually can slow down and print and engineer it in such a way that the angles would be safe for printing just from the ground up, right? So, exactly, Belinda. So there's software that can help you build supports in a model after it's done. So that's a lot of times when you buy miniatures. That, like, if you buy miniatures from me as an STL file, I don't provide supports because it's very dependent on the manufacturer of the printer, the software you're using, the kind of resin, and so I don't usually provide supports. Now I can, but it'd be optimized for my printer, right? So let me go back down to a smaller size and talk about the other things you can do. So I was just moving the clay around, right? So the other thing you can do is you can add clay. I think that's still too big of a brush. So you can add clay. I think I showed this the other day. And there's other brushes to do this. I use this specific one. I like how it works. So now I have a nose. Now, you do have to think about the human body and the human proportions. And so if you know, I'll just paint. So let me grab a paintbrush and see if I can, let me make it a color. Currently wasn't a color. So if I put the eyes there, that kind of looks cool. The problem is it's not actually the way the human head works. The eyes are actually closer to halfway up and down the front of your skull, the front of your face. And so, with that painted on there, now I'm going to be better able to manage the proportions. And then the mouth is about halfway between the eyes and the bottom, right? So knowing anatomy helps a lot. Well, if you're modeling it on that skull, that helps a ton. So maybe I should, I don't know, I'm going to have to play with PureRef. I'm not sure why it's giving me so much grief. Lots of technical difficulties today. I apologize. Let me bring this back down so I can use it here. And then if I zoom in on these skulls, you can see what I'm talking about. The top of the skull is halfway, and then the bottom of the face and the jaw is the other half. And so you want to keep, so having that reference, you don't have to remember those dimensions, where if I'm sculpting from memory or sculpting, then I need to worry about it. So let me go back to my clay brush, because the other thing I can do with the clay is remove. And for some reason, it is not removing very much clay. Let me turn off the color. Whoa. All right, so you can see I'm trying to get eyes going in here, and it's just not doing what I want to do. I think I need to find a different brush, but let's just keep going. So I'm just making these sockets, just digging into the clay, right? And then I can, keep working on that nose, things like that. I think I want to change another setting in the software to make my life a little easier. Where's Dynamesh at? Okay, and then then we want to have where the teeth are going to go, right? So again, we can either bring it out as lips, or we can dig it in if we're working on a skull, right? And when I made the skull initially, obviously I was super careful, so that the jaw is actually a separate part of the skull, right? It's two pieces because the jaw moves up and down. But since I'm working on a face, I'm not so stressed about that. So, and then once I have some kind of sort of objects or components of the face, I actually go back to the smooth brush. A lot of artists will continue doing that. They work in clay and they just keep doing this. I like to work just by moving the stuff around. And so that's what I'm doing here. Is all I'm doing is I touch my stylus to the screen and it grabs the clay and I can drag it wherever I want. And so I can make those adjustments. And what I'm trying to do now is just get the forms so it looks right before I worry about any kind of detail. There is actually no need for me. In fact, I'm smoothing a lot of this out because I need to just make it look more like a face and less like a blob. But I want to make sure the forms are right so the proportions are correct. One of the things that I notice here, actually, it's not too bad. The top of the head is bigger, and then I can move this stuff in, where the skull would come down and the jaw would form. So I can move these forms in, and it looks more like the way a human face would look, right? And then the nose and the mouth, there's more distance there. And the other thing you learn when you're sculpting is if you focus here in face front and you do all these movements and you make it look super cool and you're super happy with it, let's get the closer to a mouth and it's going to be closer in, and that's actually starting to look very recognizable as a human face. And let me make the nose a little narrower in the middle and wider there. But then I turn it to the side and it looks terrible. Right? And so you want to make sure you're moving your sculpt around in 3 dimensions, because otherwise you could spend a ton of time making that nose perfect only to find that it's totally wonky. And so that's part of when you're working in 3 dimensions, you want to actually change the angle and even the 3/4 view and things like that. And so you notice that I'm going to increase the size of the brush again and bring it out. You want to make sure that the mouth, you have that almost like a muzzle, but a draft of the face. It doesn't just sink in, and you end up with different look. But you have to make sure the fundamentals of the face are as close to accurate as you can. Now, remember, I'm a stylized artist, so I can get away with more than somebody that might be trying to make a perfect representation. And that's another thing to be aware of. If you get the forms right, then you can start making a likeness of somebody, right? So let's say I want to sculpt that illustration and I want to look like that Godfrey guy. Well, I need the fundamental forms to be good so that I can make that work, right? So right now I'm inflating some of the clay so that it's working better as a tool than that move brush was for me. So there's tons and tons of tools available. In fact, I showed this the other day. These are the tools that come with the software. So these are all the different ways you can manipulate that clay. And then if I go here, these are more. So each of these is a menu full of more stuff. And I have my own brushes that I've made. So these are all hairy brushes. And so I've got a couple of dozen. And I've purchased brushes from other people. So there's just so many things you can do as you sculpt. But the basic brushes are what you want to use to get these forms before you start worrying about some of these other things you might do. So he's not, I'm going, obviously this is an hour-long program, so I'm actually rushing myself to show you some of the things you can do. And so you can, it's a process called smoothing, and what it does is it relaxes the pixels so that they work more like what you want. So I think his brow needs to be further down. The other thing to do to help you in this process, in addition to a neck, so I'm going to add both a neck. So let's do that neck. Like I did before my system crashed. The other thing you do have to be aware of is you have crashes. And so there's autosave processes and recovery processes, but there have been projects that I'd spent 8 hours on that I lost and I had to start again. It's just the nature of the complexity of what I'm doing and the software that's required. And you could just do something and move something in such a way that when it try to calculate the math, it fails. And so just be aware. So now he's got a neck to help me reference. And then the other thing you guys can expect is eyes. And so let's give him just some basic spheres for eyes so we can get those in the right place and the right size. Let's get them full front. The other thing to understand about my sculpting process, because I'm making these physical miniatures, I sculpt in what's called orthographic mode. And so there is no perspective in these images. And that's one of the reasons I have to turn it around so much too, is this isn't like looking at it from a distance or looking at it through a camera. This is just raw, flat face in each direction. So the cardinal directions are flat. There's no perspective. Now I can turn on perspective if I want. Let's get him. Come on, there we go. And so let me show you what that might look like. So here's face front. And then if I turn on perspective, you can see it changes the whole look of the model as I turn it around. The objects that are closer are bigger, and then it shrinks, and it creates a very different look. And it actually looks in some ways better, in other ways worse. And so many artists will turn this perspective on and off to get a feel for how this model is going to look. If I was modeling for an illustration, for animation, or even a movie, you'd use perspective a lot because that's how it's going to be displayed and animated and all those things. Because I'm printing it as a physical model, I normally leave perspective off. And that does change how it looks. Now, if I render it to show on my website or whatever, the renderer will go back to what the camera aperture is and the focal length and all that stuff. You configure all that. But for active sculpting, I don't worry about that. So let me create two eyes, right? And so if I have perspective on or symmetry on, let me center my, oops. It's saying it's centered, so. Okay, stop doing that. Yep, saying it's centered. So you can see here without the skull, I can move the eyes around to make sure they're exactly where I want them. So if I bring it back, I can shrink them a little bit, I think. And then from this angle, make sure, I think they need to be up a little more. And then the center of the eye, if you know anything about the human face, is going to come down to about the sides of the mouth. And so that helps you understand how that's going to look. So with eyes and a neck, this isn't too bad, right? And so this is what you can do. The other thing you can do, I'm going to leave this alone for just a minute just so I can show you. Since I've made so many things, I have my own library. There's a library of things that you have from, in fact, let me show that first. There's a library of things you get with tools like ZBrush. So here in this project, there's already models. There's a female, there's a demo soldier, there's a male, and there's a demo head and a female head that you can start with if you like. Like I said, I like to sculpt my own. But there's also these other projects, like there's this thing called head planes. And basically each of these are a different resolution of proportions of a face just using these like there's blocky ears, a blocky nose, and a place where you put the eye. And you could start with something like that too, which helps you as an artist if you're just starting out. Your proportions start where you want them to be. Everybody like me recommends you do it from the sphere as practice, and you do that as many times as you can because it builds that muscle memory of the proportions and everything. Now, Blender has a library, it's just not as big. And then you can also get from people free models and other artist models through the Blender network. So Blender does have a few, like they have a human model that you can start with. So at least the body proportions are the same. I don't know if they have just a plain old head. I just don't know the answer. But there's a huge Blender network of artists and people that share their work, and that gives you a lot. And so I've gotten a couple of those too for myself for some animals and things. But there's all these tools. But as I mentioned, I've done some sculpting of my own, as you guys probably already know. And so I have some assets that I use. One of them, just really quick, I've made this eyeball that I can use so I can see actually the center of the, I don't know if is it the iris? Is it the pupil? The pupil, the center of the pupil, so I can do a lot more perfect things. The other thing that's nice is when I render, I can get more shadows in this kind of eye than I can with just a pure sphere. So it can be very helpful. In fact, let me show you the difference if I insert that eyeball into this project. Is it really small? Where'd it go? It's hiding on me. Oh, it's not small. It's way in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, there's some weird circumstances where when you insert something, it places it very far from where you thought it might be. So let's turn off the other eyes. Come on, where are you? No. I don't know why I'm having so many problems. I did so much work to get OBS to work. I think I messed up at ZBrush. Now I have to go. So OBS is the software I use to actually do the streaming, and it's a very technical product, and I struggle with it. And I messed with it to try and get rid of the echo, and I end up starting the channel with an echo. So I'll figure it out eventually. So let me mirror that and add some resolution so you're not seeing the jaggies. So that's, oh, they're big. Actually, they need to be out more. He doesn't have any eyelids. So this is with the, well, I need to fix something here. Okay, fine. There we go. So he's at there a little wide. So let me move them back in closer. And so here's the spherical eyes, and here's the eyes with the pupil and everything. So really, really different. And so again, this helps you reference the object and do things. So I have that. The other thing I have, and this is another way people sculpt, and I'll answer your question here in a second. Belinda, give me a second. So I have somewhere in here, I'll just use this one. I have a skull that I sculpted. As you can see, I put a lot of effort into keeping it as close to a real skull as possible. Then I made some other changes, right? So we're printing this thing. And so a skull's hollow. So originally it was hollow. So I've actually added material under the jaw so it's a solid form. Even behind the teeth. Let me zoom in. And you can see here behind the teeth, I created material. So you can see the smile of this skull, and the nose and the eye sockets, they're full. And so I can use this as a model either to stick on an object like a staff or front of a shield or whatever, and I have it and it's printable. The only problem is I can't really open and close the jaw like you'd want to, if you wanted to create a screaming person or whatever. But I have this available, and I do have the other models that have the jaw that's hinged that I can open and close. But I just ended up using skulls so often in projects that having a model that's already closed all up so it's printable was an advantage. So I have this asset available. And then the other thing I wanted to show you before I talk about sculpting some more is I've sculpted heads and faces, right? So I have these women. So here's one, right? And this was based on one face sculpt. And this was quite some time ago. And then I made this one. So you just change the nose, change the mouth, change the eyes. And I would do it differently nowadays. This is probably 5 years old, maybe older, but it's still usable. And I've used this as a starting place when I sculpt elves or things like that. Well, speaking of elves, I think I have one in here. Yeah, I do. And I have this. And so very different look, right? But starting from that same model, right? And then I think I have one more to show. There might be more, but yeah, this is another one. So here's just a whole nother look. And you get a very different expression, very different face. And it's been a lot of fun to be able to do this. So once you have that skull and then you put the skin over it per se, you can do all this. Now, all of these are designed with that neutral expression. If I was going to open the mouth, I'm going to just show you really quick, then I'm going to get back to my model and talk about it. So the other thing that's powerful when you're digitally sculpting is this masking concept, where I'm just protecting parts of the model with this mask, right? Just like you would with masking tape, right? So that's a great way to think of it. And so once I've protected that part of the model, now I can just work on the other part. So from the side, let's get that move tool we've used before, that rotating thing. And I can open her mouth, just like the jaw normally would. Well, as you can see, that looks fine, but now I have to create a hole and then put in the teeth and things like that. So this model, while I can do that, and I often do, because I sculpt for in a fixed pose for modeling, for printing. So the models are printed and placed on the table. This is how my workflow is. If you were going to model for animation or games or whatever, you'd actually set it up where there's teeth inside there, and the mouth can open and close, and the eyes can open and close. So you'd actually work a little bit differently. But it isn't, for what I do, it isn't particularly difficult for me to make this screaming woman. So that actually doesn't look too bad. I have to fix her jawline there because of the way the masking works, and then add the teeth and indent that mouth a little bit. Because I want to print it, this actually isn't too bad, because what I could do, let me go back to that side view, is mask off the jaw, maybe the side of the mouth. Now I just have that space, and with that same brush, pull it back, because I don't have to go very far, because I'm just going to put in teeth and I want to print it, right? So I could just add teeth top and bottom and make a few adjustments, and I have this woman who's singing or yelling or whatever. So there's a lot of power in having these models pre-done. And then I haven't forgotten your question, Belinda. I will get you back to you. Don't worry. I'm getting there. The other thing you can do once you have that model is you can just start stretching and twisting and doing different things. So from a basic human skull, I elongated the skull. I gave him a very big mouth, gave him a crazy pointed nose, and a really, really big eye sockets. The other thing I did to make this work was to create these eyes with the lids already there. And that gave me a lot of freedom to play with the forms to make it almost a caricature, right? And so because you have the basic form using human norms, the eyes halfway down the skull, mouth halfway between the eyes and the chin, etc., doing those things, Then you have it saved, then you can play with it and you can get these really fun things. And that's how I would do Godfrey. I would start with the basic human form and then move things around to give them those big fat cheeks, to that bigger head, and then put it on a body. And then there's another one I did where it's just a totally different approach. Oh, he's facing the wrong way. So I was playing with this, and you can see it's much rougher. What do I do with a different kind of nose, different cheeks, and big ears? So you can play with it once you have that basic sculpt done and you've practiced doing those basic skulls. And so these I have as assets for myself. And then I have other assets that I have. Again, some of these are turned. Oh, I guess my view is backwards. So I took that basic skull and I changed its shape a bit. This is a dwarven head, and he's got way too many teeth. And then I gave him a beard because, of course, a dwarf skeleton has to have a beard. Was there something else I want? Oh, and then I had that skull, and then I could make this. Again, because I had that basic skull, I created this, a skull doesn't have any expression. So if you want your skeletons to look cooler, you create expressions, right? And so I created this stylized skull with flames coming out. And this was the top of a staff, if I remember correctly. And I decided to keep it because he's got these wild teeth, created these angles in the skull to give him this angry expression. And those are things you can do once you have those base models. And the more you practice, the more you can do. The other thing I did was I got some illustrations and pictures of an actual gorilla. And I actually modeled a skeleton. Now, as you can see, some of the parts are not, I didn't have to worry too much. I'm not going to create a gorilla skeleton as a miniature. I just wanted the framework so I could make gorilla-like models. So they're just basic rough shapes for the feet and hands because I'm going to want to model those more accurately. But the skull, the way the spine works and everything else is modeled on a real gorilla. And so those are the things you do with those references to give yourself assets. And because they're all bones, I made a bone creature, and I could take bones from different things to add them to that model. So having your asset library and the longer you sculpt, the bigger your asset library becomes. And you can see I've got a lot of different things. So, and this is the final one before I go back to sculpting. So I got all turned around again. I took that human form and made a mechanical form. So this is like an Ensandra Oz base head, right? So I sculpted that just from a basic human shape. And I'm like, okay, what would change if this was a machine and a mechanical thing? And so this is a basic Ensandra Oz. I think I actually have two. And I made even more, but I started with these. Yeah, here's the different one. So I added more detail to it, but it was the basic same shape, but I brought in the cheekbones so it almost looks feminine, right? And so that's the other thing about understanding the forms of the face and practicing and having those reference pictures is a female face, even though the skull is almost identical, looks completely different. And you need to understand how that works to make it look feminine versus masculine. And that takes practice. The other thing that takes practice is having it look like a person. So likenesses is a very strong talent you can practice. I can do likenesses sort of. And because it's stylized, I've had pretty good success with my likenesses. I've done wedding cake toppers for a few people. And of course, I've done miniatures based on the illustrations of the family in the Gooey Den. But I don't think I'm very good at it. If I look in the mirror, I say I'm not very good at it. I'm better at just these generic creative characters where I don't have to worry about who it looks like. And if it turns out to look like somebody, that's just a bonus. All right, so let me get back to some questions that I've seen in the chat. So, do I want to sell my assets? Well, The challenge with selling your assets is now they can be used by anybody for anything, and you're kind of letting go of your creations. And so I feel very strongly about intellectual property. So I'm a less comfortable with it, although if it's just a skull or a base model. The other issue is a lot of the base models are available already. And so it's a very crowded market for these kind of resources. There's lots and lots of people that sell or give away all of the things. Thanks for coming, Dr. Ransom Keys. I appreciate it. And so that's why I don't sell my assets. If somebody was using a tool and wanted one of my assets, I could certainly work on an individual basis. And I can actually export as OBJs and STLs, and they could be imported into something like Blender. So there is some cross-pollination possible depending on the type of asset you were looking for. So if you're playing with sculpting, Belinda, I'm happy to help out. And then when you say, where do I get these? Where do I get what? Are you still there? So let me go back to our model that we were working on. In fact, now that I look at it, it's kind of robotic looking. I think it doesn't look organic enough. And so I need to do some major changes. So do I have the moon brush? Yeah. I don't like things to be so perfect anyway. The other thing you can do as a reference for somebody is add some hair, because it changes how they look completely. And so just some shape for hair can really make a difference. The other thing that I do, because it's available in ZBrush from multiple ways, I don't sculpt ears anymore because I hate it. And so there are brushes I can use that have ears. So let me grab one. They're an elfin ear. I don't want two of them. That's in the wrong place. So that's the only challenge, is it takes a minute to get it where you want it. See, and he already looks better with some kind of ears, right? They're too high, and the other, we can move them, which is what I'm going to do. Again, using those masking tools. Doesn't really want to make it easy, though. And so I'm going to move them down. Tilt them. Whoa. Tilt them. That's not bad. And as you can see, the way we have this, it looks pretty good from this angle. You look to the side and it's all hooked up, but that's okay. We're going to fix that. And again, since part of its mass, it only affects the part that isn't masked. So now we have some kind of elven dude, and his ears are still way too high. So I'm going to have to move them down some more. Not sure why I'm not having any luck with that. Oh, so that gorilla skeleton I sculpted. And so what I did was I just went on Google and some of those other sites and looked for gorilla skeleton. And then once I had the reference, I was able to sculpt the pieces. I just sculpted the different bones, the rib cage. I spent the most of the time on the skull, as you could see when I was there. A foot. Where is he? There he is. So I spent the most time on the skull. So you can see, and it's a articulated jaw, right? So I can open and close it and things. So I put a lot of effort into the skull because I use it the most. But the rest of the skeleton, I just modeled each piece. So um, if I look at, so here's the whatever the four. That's one thing I wanted to share with everybody. So while I've taken professional courses in art in high school and college and things like that, I don't know that anatomy that well. I haven't done that, and so I don't know if this is a fibia, a tibia, a tribula. I don't know. I use the artwork and the scientific photos and stuff to make it, and then the little side bone, and just so I could practice. And instead of doing a skeleton of a human, I have access to those. I just did a gorilla because I didn't have access to that, and so I appreciate the kind words. But this was a lot of fun, and it's interesting. I used that skull. I think I have. I used that skull for this bugbear model. And as you can see, the skull really informed how his head turned out. Right. So I made a model from this. This is just the base model with the head, so you can change and play with it and everything. But I was pretty happy with how this turned out. I think I did another one where I was actually trying to do an actual face of an ape. And so this face of an ape actually became the model for that bugbear figure, right? So once you have the skull, that informs the rest of it, and if you know where the muscles go, again, from this for the skull, like the jaw muscles and the muscles around the eyes, then you're getting really really good and very very real looking characters and models that way. And so it's just something that you want to work on if you jump into this hobby. And like I said, if you use Blender, it's free to play with, and they've really put a lot of work into the tool to make it very, very viable as a sculpting tool. So every release of the product, it's open source. They've added more tools. Now it's designed to do everything. So it's got animating tools, rigging tools, and all, modeling tools and sculpting tools. So you pick the tool you want to use. I was able to, when I got into it, it wasn't as good at the sculpting and didn't have the tools. So I invested in ZBrush. And I've learned ZBrush, it's really hard for me to give it up. But I do think that the other tools are good. And in fact, the tools available on the iPad, I think I mentioned this a week or two ago, are also good. And they're getting better. In fact, they're getting so good that ZBrush is working on an iPad version. And I'm looking forward to that. So when I travel, I can continue to do my sculpting. And so once you have your basic guy, then you can start adding the secondary forms. So I'm adding his cheeks. I need to fill out, the muscles a little bit around the jaw so that he looks a little stronger. He's clearly going to be a guy based on how I'm building him. I need to work on his mouth because that looks really lame. So then once you have these tertiary forms, then you go back and make sure the big forms are not getting distorted. Like I've created these weird ears that have really messed with his skull. I mean, they really have done a number. Now you can leave it that and make it intentional if you feel like it looks plausible. In this case, it looks like there's something, he's diseased or something. But I could make his head narrower, which is what I'm doing now, to try and make it work. So instead of fixing the ears, I'm changing the whole rest of the character, which is really funny, where I could have just gone back and fixed the ears the right way. So you can see that a lot of my workflow is just moving the clay around until I get the form language the way I want it. And remember, I mentioned in another episode, one of the things you do, I have this black silhouette up here in the upper left, and that helps me see, okay, this isn't too bad, but it's looking a little flat, right? And so a little bit like Nosferatu, yeah, that's true. But his whole face needs to come out a bit. It needs to be more. It depends on the person, but it usually looks and reads better if the forehead kind of moves back. He's got way too much of the back of his skull. That looks a little better. So that looks a little better, and again, that's why you keep rotating around. His narrow face actually works okay. Let's move his jawline back, and so you just keep doing it till you get what you like. And let me see if I can find another clay brush, because the clay brush I'm using is not really showcasing the kind of things you can do. Yeah, so I picked a different clay brush. I'm going to change the size. And again, you can use it like you were actually building up clay instead of moving the model around. And so you can quickly get really good forms. And I'm using a tool called Dynamesh so that I can get more pixels. So you really quickly can get forms done with this technique as well. You don't have to do the Harry method of just moving stuff around. And sometimes happy accidents give you what you want, and sometimes they don't. And that's why the product in most digital software has undo. So, but I do like how the cheekbones were going, and maybe we want to do a stronger chin, right? And so you can see I'm just adding clay instead of moving it around, and that gives you a very different workflow, and that actually looks pretty darn good. And it actually makes the ears look better to do that buildup. This is just another technique for modeling. It doesn't have to be the Harry technique of moving stuff around. And again, I'm working at a very, very 27,000 is not tiny resolution. Like I could be working in 5,000 polygons. I'm at 20,000 now, so 5 times that. But if I increase the resolution, let's say, you can see it looks different. And then if I use the clay brush, I'm getting a very different kind of look. And one of the nice things about using this kind of clay brush as you're working, and a lot of us do that, you can take advantage of the automatic texture it's creating by changing the angle you do it, so that later when you're texturing it, there's some texture already, right? So, this is just, I wanted to give people some idea of not just, sculpting objects and things, the process for doing a face. And again, this kind of exercise can lead to something like this, right? This turned out really nice. And it can lead to, this model that I've used this face on 4 or 5 different miniatures. And I just made some minor adjustments. And that I can show you real quick. Back to the move tool. If I just change her chin, right? Sherry looks completely different. And I have these forms on the side of her face because I wanted to look less human. If I get rid of those, she looks very different. Or I could do something totally crazy and just narrow her face, right? Now I have a different model, right? I mean, there's just and you can see this is an old ear from 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm not very good at ears. So I just use the built-in ears that are available in the tool. And like I said, first I got them from other artists. I bought their ears so I could use them. And now it comes as a brush within ZBrush. And you can see her, when I narrowed the face, I'm going to have to change her eyes. She's got very big eyes. But it's just so easy once you have your base models to make changes and see how they look. Like I can just say, okay, I want this guy to have different ears. Maybe let's give him the angry look. Right. So those are the things you get to, and that's why animation works, right? Because I can make this model and I can rig it and make those micro expressions and things. So now I have a different look or a different model, and Maybe he's got a narrow blade-like nose, right? So anyway, that's sculpting faces in ZBrush. And I really appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate all the feedback and the interaction. I love that. And I hope people found this interesting and useful. And I'm looking for suggestions for future topics. I'm working on setting it up so I can show people how I paint miniatures. I think that would be fun. It's a lot of, I can't call it construction, but I have to set up so that my monitors are changed so I can do that. But I'm happy to do that if people are interested. But I really do enjoy these, and I hope you guys like it too. And I'm going to sign off, and everybody have a wonderful evening. And if you're part of the Goo family, I'll be chatting on Saturday with Goo Morning Zyathé. Have a great